Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, including specifically on the latest tensions between the Islamic Republic of Iran, its proxies, versus Israel, it's always important to remember how this war began. 315 days ago, on October 7th of 2023, the Islamist Hamas terror organization and its affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched a surprise onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200, mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 115 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The next day, on October 8th of 2023, Iran practically joined the war when it greenlighted its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks into Israel. Since then, thousands of rockets have been fired from Lebanese territory into Israel, and not only from there. Iranian proxies have joined the fight by launching projectiles towards Israel from Yemen to Iraq to Syria, including from Iran proper, when it launched a barrage of some 320 projectiles from Iranian territory towards Israel on the night between 13th and 14th of April, attack that may reoccur once more. And to deliberate that and much more, we're now joined by the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, namely Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. General Gavish, give us somewhat of an update. We hear, of course, from the IDF spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Agari, that the message to the public here in Israel, no change in the instructions and directives at this point in time.
Well, there's a big difference between the civilians and what we would like to happen. That the civilians would be from the one hand alerted, but then from the other hand would continue with their life. And of course, the military, the IDF, and the Air Force, in the air defense in particular, which is in a full, I would say, scale alert, because intentions are between the 2 years of the leader of Iran. They could say something and do something else, and we should be prepared for all the options. And this is what is being done in the last days. We have to say, together with the CENTCOM, Central Command, and some assets also from EUCOM, all of those forces in the area are in a very high alert if something would happen. We have to say that also from a military perspective, that those times were times that we could prepare ourselves even better. And I think that what is being really said, it is very important because the rhetorics and the intention, at least from the Israeli side, this is for sure, it is not to stay only on the defense. And if it would be needed, Israel stated it very clearly that we would act also on the offensive. And I think this is something very important, significant, different from what it was in the 14th of April. And I would add here that in the last days, we even heard this rhetoric coming from the United States, which is something that is rarely done, when they stated that some of the Navy assets in these areas, some of the Navy assets in this area are with the they are super capable to perform in the offensive, and this is also something very important.
And yet, what we hear from Washington proper, particularly also the latest statement by the Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh, is that they will come in Israel's defense, in Israel's aid, but when asked about potentially joining a strike against Iran or what it actually means, they shy away from explicitly explaining what it may entail. But for that, I'd like to turn to our next guest in Central Israel, namely Colonel in Reserve Miri Eisen, just until recently the director of the International the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University, formerly, of course, a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate and an advisor to a couple prime ministers. It's good to see you, Colonel. I'd like to focus actually on a visit today by the Foreign Secretary of State, Allen from the United Kingdom, as well as the Foreign Minister of France, Séjourné, meeting with their Israeli counterpart Israel Katz, during the course of which Jerusalem's top diplomat highlighted that the best way to deter Iran would to commit, both in Paris as well as in London, including particularly in the United States, which is leading the current efforts throughout the Middle East under CENTCOM, that they will not only stand by Israel defensively, but will also join Israel in striking Iranian territory, including strategic assets, in the event that Iran would belligerently target Israel.
Here I am, sitting right now, central of Israel, Tel Aviv, and here everybody's waiting for that Iranian attack. And what do these two foreign ministers bring when they come all the way to Israel, to Jerusalem, not supposed to be targeted, Tel Aviv area a bit more? What they bring is, watch out, Iran might do something and expand the war. And I'm thinking to myself, here I am in Israel, and what the British and French foreign ministers want is to be sure that Great Britain, the UK, and France, and Europe for that matter, are not involved. Iran is against the world. Iran is not just against Israel. And I am very critical in that sense of the voices, the rhetoric that comes out of Europe, that comes out of France, that comes out of the UK. The United States is slightly different, but I'm very critical of the fact that what they're trying to do is to contain a war where it's only against Israel. Hezbollah has attacked us every single day for the last 314 days. Hamas is in a horrific war against us. Iran is staging and abetting this war, and what the world wants to do is make sure that they don't get involved. I hope that we can get past this stage, that the voices that we hear from here, like myself, Jonathan, like yours, are voices that are heard in Europe, that people understand that Iran is not about being against Israel, and it's not about supporting the Palestinian cause. This is about the Islamic regime of Iran being a threat worldwide, and everybody should be on board. And yes, the Islamic regime of Iran should be feeling under threat, that they may be attacked, and that it will be a threat that will be followed through. That's what I'm going to hope for, even though that's not what I heard when I was listening to these foreign ministers and what they came to Israel to do.
Unfortunately so. Let's now turn to elsewhere in Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Reddick Shafir, formerly an Israeli Air Force commander, fighter pilot, and I will not go down your entire curriculum vitae since we'll have to dedicate an entire program to that, but it's good to see you, General. I'd like to hear from you on a later publication by the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, of a very significant underground infrastructure, subterranean hallways showcased with trucks driving in them, with precision-guided munitions attached to those trucks. Of course, the Iranians have been very active in supporting all of their proxies, including in Gaza, to facilitate those subterranean structures. Nevertheless, with now seeing this concretely, even though we knew that it exists also in Lebanon, what can Israel do to ensure that in the event that the Hezbollah terror organization launches its belligerent attack, as it promised to do in the near future, what does Israel intend to do in order to confront that threat?
Well, let's divide this into two. One of them is taking care of the long-range, high munition volume missiles, those that are stationed on trucks that would be driven out of their caves or their underground are obviously will obviously be targeted by the Israeli intelligence and air force, and I would dare to say that some of those places are targets that would be hit if a war does come about, would be hit first, either to destroy those tunnels and not allow those vehicles to get out, or hit them once they come out because they're a very visible target, much even smaller missiles or drones that can be well hidden in smaller places and more difficult to find. The other one is that Israel will not suffice in dealing with those rockets because the numbers are so great that this will not deter Hezbollah. What will deter is the fact that if we go into full-scale war, the assets of Hezbollah and the Lebanese infrastructure will be hit with directly as a result of hitting Israel. We're talking about their energy systems, water systems, fuel depots, port itself, and mainly the Beirut Damascus road that leads to Baalbek, which is the stronghold of Hezbollah. These are all targets that I'm pretty sure will be hit quite soon after such a war does break out. I'll also emphasize that firing meaningful rockets I'm talking about numbers and accuracy at Israeli infrastructure will go into a full-blown war. And this is, I would say, the stick and carrot that we're talking about. This is the stick part. So in this war of words and PR, I think we can relate those trucks to part of the Hezbollah PR of blowing their chest to show strength. Another thing that, if I may allude to, with Iran, about 30 years ago, Prime Minister Rabin had started the peace accords with the Palestinians, and he said that we need to reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians before the Iranians start to develop and acquire a nuclear capability. Today's leadership in Israel, which is extreme right wing, or at least leveraged by extreme right wing, are not working with the Europeans or Americans, who all have an inkling and a wish for some kind of a Palestinian entity for the day after. This is, I would say, the main rift that we have with Europe and the United States. What will happen in the day after? I'm alluding to the fact that they will not join us in attacking Iran without some viable plan of what happens in the day after.
Indeed. Well, of course, there are separate approaches and policy papers that have been submitted to the Prime Minister's office in order to provide alternatives. And some of those policy papers have been merged into adjustable, quantifiable solutions that may be pursued once the Islamist Hamas is degraded to a point where alternatives can be subject to leadership in the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, time will tell. It's not unveiled to the public as of yet, and therefore there's not enough information to really portray the true and viable solution to what may appear in the Gaza Strip. We do see, of course, Palestinian Authority Chairman or Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas speaking both in Russia as well as in Turkey with very concrete expectations that the Palestinian Authority would be the one to take over the Palestinian enclave, something that there are speculations right now in Washington may not be truly viable, since they would not necessarily survive such an effort unless Hamas is degraded to a point of no return. But let's turn to General Doron Gavish, and I'd like to ask you, particularly right now, there are negotiations in Doha, Qatar, to try and hammer out some sort of arrangement with the Islamist Hamas and Israel. Of course, the great gaps remain nonetheless. Some diplomats who are dealing with those negotiations, Western diplomats in particular, have voiced some cautious optimism. Is there some root that can be planted in this scenario in order to yield the appropriate fruit?
Well, this is a great question, Jonathan. Of course, we saw it more than once that our negotiators were there, and unfortunately, until now, at least, there was no success. But I think that what is really important is to look on it from the strategic point of view, because from the one hand, we all have to remember that Israel basically announced two main goals for this war. One of them was, of course, with regarding to the Hamas, and the other one with regard to the hostages that are still there, and we all want to see them back in Israel. And we can't say that we achieved them yet. So it might be that if it would be a successful one and would allow us to be very close to those two goals, this would be very important. But this is if we are containing it only to the Gaza Strip, because there is an opportunity, if we want to be optimistic for a second, that this would also influence other arenas that we would have to take care of. And I'm talking about mainly in the northern part, of course, which is with the Hezbollah from a military point of view from one hand, and then from a diplomatic point of view, which unfortunately I'm not very optimistic there. We have to remember that again, from the military strategy point, Israel announced till today that it is in the attack in the Gaza Strip and the active defense in the northern part of Israel, and probably we should be changing this strategy, and not so far from now, because also we have to remember there are thousands and tens of thousands of Israelis that are still refugees in their own home, and we want them to be able to go back to their towns and villages in the northern part of Israel.
Of course, IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari did mention that since the start of the war, namely when Hamas launched its onslaught on southern Israel on October 7th, to date, 17,000 terror operatives have been confirmed as eliminated, something very significant. Colonel Eisen, your take on it?
I'm not optimistic, and even Doron's cautious optimism is because he was describing the Israeli side and the international side. Sadly, I, for years now, have been looking at the other side. And here I'm going to represent, even though I don't want to, Hamas. Hamas does not view the hostages as human beings. Hamas views the hostages as, essentially, and the term I use is just a harsh one, they are bargaining chips. And when I say bargaining chips, they are worthwhile both alive and dead. And as you started at the beginning also, Jonathan, we're talking over 250 were taken. And at the time that they were taken, they took dead bodies with them. They do psychological warfare about the dead bodies, including in the last few days. They are horrific in the way that they treat these hostages. And again, I say that it does not give me any optimism. If I am Yahya Sinwar, which the genocidal leader of Hamas sitting in the Gaza Strip right now, who does not have clear capabilities to be able to be on the phone all the time. He's underground in that underground system. He is running away from us all the time, but he's supposed to lead Hamas. He's supposed to make decisions. And the voices that we hear from there are ones that do not coincide with any kind of resolution or agreement. And I say it very sadly. I wish I could say other things. I'd love to be happily surprised. I totally support the Israelis being there, doing our best. We need to get back our people. And it doesn't matter, by the way, in that sense, dead or alive. I want every single one of the 115 that are there, dead bodies and live people, to be back. But the Hamas have no interest, not right now. Hamas have an interest for Iran to join in. Hamas have an interest for Hezbollah to join in. And I say it sadly because I think it impacts the negotiation. Everything impacts everything. At the end, somebody has to deliver our people, those people in captivity. And I do not think that this Hamas can deliver.
General Shafir, Miri just said something very important, and that is Yahya Sinwar, who is both a military and political leader since Ismail Haniyeh is no longer amongst the living, does not have really an interest to see a scenario in which an opportunity arises where Iran pledged to attack Israel. Now, Iran comes and says if the negotiations are succeeding, we won't attack Israel because we'll give this an opportunity. Hezbollah says we will attack irrespective of the negotiations and its outcome. But what comes down to it, Hamas doesn't have any interest in seeing a situation in which Israel may face an all out regional conflagration. And by doing so, it would achieve the goals that it has set for itself from the get go, as is noted in its charter, to annihilate the state of Israel and to replace it as a once again, the Waqf lands, as is defined in its charter, since the conquest of the first Islamic armies.
Well, obviously, this is something that we can all agree on. And the question is, are there any pressure points within Hamas that applying a pivotal pressure on them would bring them to a point of negotiating an exchange, an understanding, and of course, getting our hostages back? There are a few points to be made. One of them is military, but we need to understand that even if we know where Yahya Sinwar is, our ability to extract our hostages from his vicinity is almost non-existent. Of those who are in Gaza, and I wouldn't wonder if some of the hostages were smuggled out of Gaza, and I don't want to go into that. These points are, is there a threat to Hamas's leadership, continuous leadership in Gaza at this time? I'm talking about policing, I'm talking about civil authority, distributing food, etc. There's none of that, and we have not been instrumental in creating such a replacement or a threat to Sinwar for several reasons, some of which are internal politics in Israel. So that's one point that we have missed out. The other one is we were not able to garner enough support from the West, talking about Europe and the United States, in a war with Gaza because we haven't offered any vision for the day after. These are the two weak points where we want our hostages back, but Sinwar, really doesn't care how many Palestinians are killed in Gaza. On the contrary, the more civilian deaths there are, the more pictures the world sees, the stronger his support within the West for the Gazans. We cannot stop the human aid or the aid into Gaza because we would be taken as responsible for hunger. So there are a lot of points that we haven't thought of before we went into the war or during the war, that at this time we don't have a strong enough leverage for Sinwar to back down from some of his unreasonable demands. And so the pressure, or as we may call, the ball is in a way in our hands, alluding to what Miri Eisens said about the meeting of our foreign minister with the ministers of France and the UK.
Indeed. Well, I think it's important to highlight 2 points. The first one is there was an announcement by Defense Minister Yoav Galant here in Israel that in collaboration with Central Command, the U.S. Military contingent here in the region, they have extracted a very large number of children, elderly, both men and women, in order to receive medical treatment, both here in Israel as well as in other partner countries, something that indicates the morality of the IDF and Israel as a state that continues to take care of the people of Gaza, irrespective of the leadership, and they make a very clear distinction between Israel's war against Hamas and the population of Gaza that is going to stay there. We need to understand that and to amplify that. Now, the second element that I think is important with regard to the day after, every military strategist and philosopher in history always says, relinquish as little as possible information to the enemy. Now, in the day of media and the age of media where everything is public, how can you deal with something like that? Miri, as one of the top experts on this topic around the world, you have 35 seconds, in order to elaborate on this.
You cannot control the message. Everybody sees everything. Everybody reframes it and says it in a way which takes it out of context, which means you have to act, talk, shoot. And I say that because at the end, you cannot control the message. So you need to take your actions and to be clear in what you do. Everybody's going to take it out of context.
Thank you, Colonel Eisen. General Gavish, one message as the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense to the public here in Israel. Just in case something happens, God forbid, you have 15 seconds.
So for the people of Israel, stay alert, but continue with your life knowing that the IDF, the Air Force, is doing whatever is necessary to defend the state of Israel. We also say that it is not hermetic defense, but I think that we have a good defense.
This is all the time that we have for today. So I'd like to thank Colonel Eisen, General Shafir, and General Kavish, of course, for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel, and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at TV7israelnews.com.